Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Monday Morning Musing. This is Steve. I'm going to wrap up this short little mini series we've been doing on the topic of prayer. And I want to talk to you today about ill-advised prayers, maybe ignorant prayers, and in my case, the example that I'm going to use, I'm going to even say wicked prayers. The prayers that poorly educated Christians, Christians who lack courage, pray, that are actually detrimental and damaging to other people. I know that probably sounds strange, but wait till you hear this story. So I'm going to share a true story with you about wicked prayers, prayers that Christians pray that are that enable wickedness. So I was a pastor at my last stop many years ago in a traditional church format. And in that town where I was at, there was an ecumenical movement, a unity movement, where all the pastors get together. And I was at that. And this story was the last one of those I went to. Now you'll see why at the end. And, we try to get along and bridge our differences and things like that. And there's probably 30, 35 pastors of the city in this group. And at the time, they were really big on being gatekeepers of the city and, intercessors. And, nothing happens in our city unless we control the spiritual gates. And of course, the biggest gatekeepers were always the biggest churches, the most successful church. It was assumed that whoever was pastor of that church, you're the regional gatekeeper over our city, and prayer for our city and interceding for our city and prayer for this and prayer for that, and we get together. And so I'm at one of these meetings, and there's a man there who's probably younger than I am now. I would say at the time he was probably in his early 60s. And he's there with his wife. And his wife is severely ill, dealing with congestive heart failure. She's in a wheelchair. She has the oxygen tubes and everything. And this guy says to us, he was like an associate pastor at some other church. And he says, brethren, will you pray for us? We feel God's leading us in a certain way. He wants to say, tell us. Well, I feel God's calling me to go plant a church in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I'll let you figure out for yourself what giant, famous worldwide ministry is headquartered in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I know God's called me to, preach the word, but my wife doesn't want to go. What should I do? Well, the advice that these so-called leaders of the city, and now remember, these are pastors leading the churches. Some of them leading the biggest churches in town. This is what we got. Oh, brother, God's ways are mysterious, and who are we to tell God right? And the call of God is high, and the call of God to ministry comes before every other thing. And, Jesus said, we've got to love God even above our family members, and oh God, and this is a tough decision that you're going to have to make, but God comes before our families, and the ministry, you can't abort the ministry that God has called you to. Yes, we will pray for you. So it goes to the prayer time at the end of the meeting. And, that was the flavor of the prayer. Lord, lead and guide our brother as he makes this decision. And so the prayer time's over. And I said, excuse me. So, brother, are you considering abandoning your wife leaving your wife here, and this happened to be in Alaska at the time. Well, yeah, because and you guys, everybody, like everybody just prayed. The ministry comes first. If she doesn't want to come, well, I'm gonna leave her here. I was shocked. I was shocked into silence that this room full of leaders, spiritual influencers, and gatekeepers of the city had just basically prayed, endorsing prayers, wishy-washy, subjective prayers over this guy. In that whole room of pastors, 35 pastors, guess how many guys objected to what just happened? 2. Myself and one other man. And guess what happened to us at that meeting? They ganged up on us. Oh, who are you to decide the ways of God and the mysteries of how God works? And, you don't have any right. God might be calling this man to something unusual. Well, I'll tell you what. That was the last one of those meetings that myself and that other brother went to. Well, guess what happened? Based on that wishy-washy, spineless, passive, manipulative prayers of endorsement, they didn't tell him to go ahead, but they did say, no, brother, your obligation and your primary duty is to the woman you married. No, you should not leave your sick and dying wife alone to go fill some silly ambition and ego-driven need for significance to go be a pastor. No, nobody said that. Well, you can imagine what he did after he prayed and what he got from the Lord. Yeah, he abandoned her, left her in Alaska, goes to Oklahoma to, quote, pastor this church. And you can imagine what happened in about 9 months. Yeah, the church was a disaster. It collapses. His marriage is ruined. I don't know whether she divorced him or just left him. He comes back with his tail between his legs and boy, I didn't realize that, the devil was going to resist me as hard as he did. And he was a country boy. Hey, devil resisted me in my ministry. And a room full of leaders, so-called, which I'm offended by even attributing that word to the people in that room. What it is there's no spinelessness, spineless, wishy-washy leaders who would actually tacitly endorse a man leaving his sick and dying wife to go fulfill a ministry. It's just, this illustrates 2 things, just how sick evangelicalism is, and what you see with your eyes you can't judge, because so-and-so's pastoring a big church, he's a mighty man of God. You cannot make those judgments. But more importantly for today, how weak, cowardly, manipulative prayer can be evil. Yeah, evil. No, you don't need to pray about should you abandon your spouse in her infirmity to go satisfy what you think is some mystical spiritual call. So that is just one of many examples I could give you where Christian prayers and Christian prayer warriors and Christian intercessors pray wicked, manipulative prayers. And I'm just going to leave it at that, because some of you probably aren't going to like what I just said. But I have more. I have more and darker stories of evil prayers prayed by Christian leaders, and some of a national stature, some that if I mentioned their name, you would know. It's either about power, ego, money, and control. So the topic of prayer is both wonderful, that's where we began this little series, and problematic. Like so many things in the Christian life, it needs to be mentored and supervised by people with some element of discernment, maturity, and development in their Christian walk. The other, and just as a little postscript on this, and I don't want to get all charismatic on it, but the reason that there was a problem in that particular organization, that particular unity group, everyone in that room except myself and the other brother were pastors with a pastoral mindset and a pastoral perspective. And that is, we don't want to disturb the sheep. There was no prophetic voice. Myself and the other brother were the only prophetic voices in that group, and when we spoke, we were marginalized and dismissed, which is always what happens to prophetic voices. But it's a great example, too, of how if you gather all of like kind and you only have one point of view or one perspective, it's not healthy. And particularly, I would call unsanctified or an undeveloped shepherding grace. A shepherding grace that cannot say the difficult thing because they're afraid they're going to lose a person, lose a friend, lose a relationship, lose the tithe, lose the money, because they're going to go, because you're going to say something that's going to upset them. So you can build a great big successful church by just never saying anything controversial or contrary. Just people are going to come because you're never going to challenge them. That brother should not only have been challenged, he should have been rebuked. There should have been discipline, and there was none. So don't judge with your eyes, and don't assign value or merit by what you see. Don't assign value and merit by what you think you know, because somebody's running a big church and they look all successful. There can be very dark, evil, and wicked reasons why that church is successful. And when it comes to prayer, we have a guide. We have the so-called Lord's Prayer, and I have a video on that. And our prayer must be in the Spirit of Christ, governed by the Spirit of Christ, expressed by the Spirit of Christ, and ruled by the Spirit of Christ, which is the cruciform Spirit, the Spirit of prayer. Not just novel human desires and ambitions that we want God to put his thumbnail of approval on, or his fingerprint of approval. So that's it for today. See you next time.